Ava Montgomery and Celine Rhodes walked into Chris Dickerson's life like they'd done it 100 times before, smiling, charming, and hiding a plan that would end in blood. What began as a glamorous rooftop party ended in one of the city's most shocking murders, unraveling a twisted web of deception, stolen identities, and a chilling conspiracy that no one saw coming. Chris Dickerson was a name that echoed through the high-end circles of the city's nightlife scene. A 32-year-old event planner, he was always the one you'd spot at exclusive parties, perfectly groomed and always with a glass in hand. His reputation was that of a smooth talker, the kind of guy who could charm anyone into attending his events, no matter how exclusive. In a world that ran on connections, Chris was someone people wanted to know. He had an uncanny ability to bring together people from all walks of life, business tycoons, aspiring influencers, fashionistas, and even some celebrities, under one roof. On the evening of Saturday, March 22nd, Chris attended what was billed as the season's most extravagant rooftop party. Set on the 20th floor of a downtown penthouse, it offered a sweeping view of the city's skyline. The air was crisp, and the lights from the surrounding skyscrapers twinkled in the distance, giving the scene an almost surreal ambience. The party was everything anyone could have imagined. The champagne flowed freely, the music was upbeat, and the guest list was strictly curated. Only those deemed elite were invited, and Chris, as the host of numerous such events, was always on the guest list. Throughout the night, Chris was the center of attention, moving from one conversation to the next, laughing and mingling with ease. He had that magnetic charisma, drawing people in with his charm. The crowd adored him, and he reveled in it, always the life of the party. Yet beneath the surface, there were rumors. Some said that Chris was dealing with a recent breakup, others whispered about his growing debt, and there were even some murmurs about potential enemies in the business. But none of that seemed to bother him on that night. He was living in the moment, enjoying the connections he was making and the connections he was about to make. As the night drew on, the atmosphere began to shift. The crowd slowly thinned, leaving behind only those who had either nowhere to be or simply didn't want the party to end. By around 2 a.m., the music grew quieter, and people began to head out. But Chris wasn't ready to call it a night. He announced to the remaining guests that he was heading back to his apartment for an after-party, and of course anyone was welcome to join. 2 women who had been standing by the bar for most of the evening accepted his invitation. Chris, ever the gracious host, led them down the elevator and out onto the bustling city streets. As they walked towards his apartment, no one could have known that the last leg of the evening would turn into something no one could ever forget. The city streets were alive with the energy of the late-night crowd, the hum of taxis, and the occasional shout of a street vendor trying to make a quick sale. Chris Dickerson led the 2 women down the sidewalk with an easy stride, his laugh echoing through the cool air. He had invited them to what he promised would be an after-party at his downtown apartment. It was something Chris did often, an impromptu gathering to keep the night going, where the drinks kept flowing and the conversations wandered into unpredictable territory. His penthouse, perched high above the city's endless lights, had a reputation for hosting these late-night escapades, often filled with industry insiders, artists, and the kind of people who lived for the thrill of the night. The women followed him, both dressed in trendy outfits that suggested they were part of the city's social elite. Chris had barely caught their names during the rooftop party, but that was never a priority. He was more focused on making connections, talking shop, and keeping the good times rolling. One of the women, with a dark bob and piercing eyes, had an air of mystery about her. The other, with a bright, almost playful smile, was more outgoing, striking up a conversation with Chris as they walked. The city's neon lights reflected in the windows of nearby shops, casting colorful glows on their faces. The evening was still young, and the promise of what awaited in Chris's apartment lingered in the air. When they reached the building, Chris swiped his key card and the door buzzed open. He greeted the doorman with a friendly wave before ushering the 2 women inside. The elevator ride was quiet, the hum of the machine filling the brief gap in conversation. Chris kept the energy light, making small talk about the party and asking what they wanted to drink when they reached the apartment. He never asked where they were from or what they did for a living, And in the world Chris moved in, that wasn't unusual. Names and details didn't matter as much as the connections being made in the moment. Inside the apartment, the mood shifted. The space was immaculate, sleek, modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the entire city. Chris led them to the living room, which was stocked with top-shelf liquor and a well-worn couch perfect for lounging. Music played softly in the background, a mix of electronic beats and jazz. The women settled in, and Chris moved behind the bar to pour drinks. He was relaxed, in his element, confident that the night was only beginning. But little did he know, the two women were not there for the usual after-party chatter. They had something far darker in mind. What seemed like an innocent continuation of the night was about to turn into something no one could have predicted. Sunday morning arrived with a gray sky and a light drizzle that misted the downtown streets. For most people, it was just another lazy weekend morning. But for Chris Dickerson's close friends, something felt wrong. He hadn't responded to any of their messages, and by noon, his phone was going straight to voicemail. That alone wasn't unusual. Chris was known to sleep late after a night out, but as the hours passed without a word, concern began to grow. He had brunch plans with two colleagues at 11 a.m., something he never missed. When he didn't show or call, their worry deepened. By 4 p.m., one of his oldest friends, Marcus, decided to check on him in person. He had a spare key from when Chris had gone on vacation a year earlier. The building staff, familiar with Marcus, let him through without hesitation. As he took the elevator up to the penthouse, a strange sense of unease settled over him. Something didn't feel right. The hallway was quiet, the air thick. When he opened the door, what he saw stopped him in his tracks. Chris's apartment was dark and still. The living room looked undisturbed at first glance. No broken windows, no signs of forced entry, but the silence was unnatural. Marcus called out his name, expecting a groggy voice from the bedroom or even a laugh from behind the kitchen counter. But there was nothing. That's when he stepped further inside and saw the horror waiting just beyond the couch. Chris was lying, motionless on the floor, his white shirt soaked with blood. His body showed signs of a brutal struggle, deep bruises along his jawline, several stab wounds to his chest and abdomen, and defensive cuts on his hands. Furniture was slightly out of place, and one of the bar stools was knocked over. The glass coffee table had a smear of blood across its surface, and shards of broken glass were scattered across the rug. Marcus backed away in shock, his heart pounding. He immediately called 911. Paramedics and police arrived within minutes, but it was too late. Chris was pronounced dead at the scene. The initial assessment suggested the attack had happened several hours earlier, likely before sunrise. Strangely, nothing appeared to be stolen. His laptop was still on the desk, expensive watches and electronics untouched. But his phone and wallet were missing. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken locks, and no smashed windows. Whoever had done this hadn't broken in. They had been let in. That chilling fact would set the tone for an investigation that would soon uncover something far more sinister than anyone expected. The investigation began immediately, but from the start, detectives faced a puzzle that didn't fit together. There were no signs of forced entry, which meant whoever had killed Chris Dickerson had either been let in or already had access. Security cameras in the hallway offered some of the first leads. Footage from early Sunday morning showed Chris entering the building with two women shortly after 2:15 a.m. They were laughing, walking closely together, and appeared to be at ease. All three went up to his penthouse, but that was the last time Chris was seen alive. What happened next remained a mystery for days. The footage didn't show anyone else entering or leaving the apartment during the night. But just after 5 a.m., the cameras caught the two women exiting the building, separately nearly 40 minutes apart. The first woman left quickly, her face partially hidden under a hoodie. The second stayed longer, lingering in the elevator as if stalling. When she stepped out into the lobby, she was wearing a black leather jacket that detectives later identified as one belonging to Chris. She looked calm, composed, even a bit smug. That was all police had to go on. Neither woman matched anyone in the apartment building's registry or known guest lists. They hadn't signed in. No fingerprints were found, no personal items left behind. Whoever they were, they had taken steps to cover their tracks. Investigators canvassed nearby businesses, hoping someone might recognize the women or provide additional footage. But with no names, no IDs, and no clear motive, progress was painfully slow. Detectives began digging into Chris's past, searching for any indication that he knew the women or had been targeted before. They explored everything: old flames, jealous rivals, disgruntled colleagues, but nothing solid surfaced. His recent calls and messages showed no contact with anyone resembling the two women. His apartment didn't show signs of a robbery, and nothing of significant value had been taken, aside from his phone and wallet. The media caught wind of the case quickly, and within days, the story spread across local headlines. Party King, found murdered in penthouse, one read. Another speculated wildly. Mystery women vanish after brutal killing. Social media fed into the frenzy, with users offering their own theories and sleuths picking apart every frame of the surveillance footage. But for the detectives working the case, none of it brought them closer to the truth. Two women had walked into Chris Dickerson's life that night. One left wearing his jacket. Both vanished into the city without a trace. The killer, or killers, had been right there on camera. And yet, it was like they'd disappeared into thin air. As days turned into weeks, frustration grew inside the precinct. The investigation into Chris Dickerson's murder was beginning to stall. Leads were drying up. The two women who had left his apartment early that Sunday morning had not resurfaced, and no one seemed to know who they were. Their faces were clear enough on surveillance footage, but facial recognition software returned no results. It was as if they didn't exist or had gone to great lengths to stay invisible. Without names, background checks, or digital footprints, investigators were stuck in a haze of dead ends and unanswered questions. The city, however, was buzzing. Chris's murder wasn't just another crime. It had rattled the image of nightlife, glamour. He wasn't known for drama or dangerous connections, so his brutal death felt especially shocking. Online forums exploded with theories. Some claimed it was a professional hit disguised as a robbery. Others suspected a jealous ex or a bad drug deal. A few even suggested the two women might have been part of a cult or criminal ring. None of these theories were supported by evidence, but they spread quickly, adding pressure on detectives already under public scrutiny. Chris's inner circle became the next focus. Detectives interviewed dozens of friends, colleagues, and acquaintances. Everyone had the same reaction: disbelief. He was well-liked, charismatic, and not known for taking dangerous risks. But there were hints that Chris had been dealing with stress in the months leading up to his death. A business venture had fallen through, and he'd confided in a friend that he was worried about money. Still, nothing pointed directly to a motive. If this had been a robbery, it was a strangely selective one. Expensive art, designer items, and jewelry remained untouched. Then there was the peculiar calmness of the second woman on the footage. Her demeanor as she left the building lingered in the minds of investigators. Most killers flee. She did not. That composure suggested something far more organized than a crime of passion. It looked like planning, calculated timing, a clean exit. That detail alone made investigators wonder, had Chris been targeted from the beginning? Behind closed doors, the homicide unit began considering a more chilling theory. What if these women weren't random guests at a party? What if they were predators, working together, using charm to gain access to private spaces before striking? With no immediate evidence to support the idea, it remained speculation. But the case no longer felt like an isolated tragedy. It felt like the beginning of something deeper, something with roots no one had yet uncovered. The break in the case came from an unexpected place. 3.5 weeks after Chris Dickerson's murder, a detective returned to the rooftop lounge where the night had started. The hope was slim. Perhaps someone had remembered something, anything that could lead them forward. Most guests had already been interviewed, some twice, but this time, the visit turned up something new. A bartender who had worked the event approached one of the officers cautiously, holding a copy of the composite sketches that had been released to the media. He pointed to one of the faces and said, "I think I served her that night." At first, the detective didn't get excited. Dozens of partygoers had seen the sketch. False leads had come in daily, but the bartender's memory was specific. He described a tattoo, something investigators hadn't released to the public. A snake coiled around a dagger, etched in black ink on the woman's left shoulder. It had briefly shown beneath her off-the-shoulder dress as she reached for her drink. That detail hadn't appeared in any reports and hadn't been shared beyond law enforcement. Suddenly, the lead felt real. Encouraged, the team pulled surveillance footage from the rooftop lounge, footage they had already combed through but with fresh eyes. And there she was, the woman with the tattoo. She appeared more than once on camera, always in the background, never drawing much attention. But one angle showed her clearly. Investigators enhanced the image and cross-referenced it again, this time focusing on the tattoo. There was no doubt. It matched the bartender's description exactly. This revelation gave detectives a timeline. The woman with the snake tattoo had been at the party for hours, blending in effortlessly. She had danced, laughed, and shared drinks with guests, including Chris. That meant her presence wasn't accidental. She had inserted herself into that environment intentionally, possibly seeking a target. The search now centered on identifying her. With the new tattoo detail, databases were searched again, this time narrowing to women with criminal records involving similar ink. Days passed before a potential match surfaced. A woman named Ava Montgomery, age 27, who had been arrested in another state 2 years earlier for credit card fraud. The photo from that arrest matched closely, but there was still no current address or digital trail. She hadn't posted on social media in over a year. Still, it was something. The team, now, had a name, a face, and a potential motive. Ava's background suggested she wasn't a random partygoer. She was experienced in deception. The case, once stalled in silence, was suddenly alive again. Detectives believed they were closing in, not just on who Ava was, but on the dangerous world she might be part of. With Ava Montgomery identified as one of the 2 women last seen with Chris Dickerson, the investigation shifted into high gear. Detectives began tracking her movements the night of the murder, hoping to find out where she went after leaving the apartment. The breakthrough came from a bar just 5 blocks away from Chris's building. Security footage from around 5:45 a.m., roughly an hour after Ava had exited the penthouse, showed her outside the bar speaking to a man wearing a hoodie and pacing nervously near the entrance. The footage was grainy, but it captured a critical moment. Ava handing something small to the man. Investigators enhanced the video and confirmed it. She was passing off a phone. Chris's phone. That single act connected her directly to stolen property, solidifying her involvement in the crime. Identifying the man became the next step. He was soon recognized by a patrol officer who had arrested him months earlier for fraud. His name was Julian Knox, a known scammer with ties to identity theft rings operating throughout the city. Julian was picked up within a day. During questioning, he denied any involvement in the murder, but couldn't explain why he was in possession of Chris Dickerson's phone. Pressured with the mounting evidence, Julian eventually cracked. What he revealed stunned detectives. According to Julian, the murder wasn't spontaneous. It was part of a scheme. Ava and her partner, the second woman from that night, were working a scam that had been running for months. They would infiltrate upscale parties and target wealthy men, using charm and alcohol to gain access to private homes. Once inside, their objective was simple: rob them while they were vulnerable or unconscious. Most nights it worked cleanly, no violence, no drama. But with Chris, something went wrong. Julian claimed Ava had called him in a panic around 4:30 a.m. She told him the man had fought back. There had been a struggle, and now there was blood. She didn't give details, but told him to meet her at a bar to take the phone and help erase any trace. He agreed. He thought it was just another robbery gone sideways, not a murder. But now, he realized how deep he was in. The confession gave police enough to link Ava to the crime scene, but more importantly, it confirmed what had only been a theory until now. Chris hadn't just been a random victim. He had been marked, lured, trapped, and he'd paid for it with his life. But one question still remained. Who was the second woman? The one still out there, still free. And what role had she played in the killing? With Julian Knox's confession on record, investigators had a clearer picture of what had happened that night, but it was only half the story. The second woman, the one who had left Chris Dickerson's apartment even later than Ava, was still unidentified. Julian didn't know her real name. He only referred to her as Celine, and even that, he admitted, might have been fake. She had been working with Ava for months, he said, both of them targeting men in clubs and high-end parties, using their looks and confidence to lower defenses. Their method was simple: charm their way inside, steal what they could, and disappear before anyone realized something was wrong. The more detectives dug, the more calculated the operation appeared. Ava and Celine had attended multiple events in the months before Chris's death, often under different names, wearing different hairstyles, sometimes with colored contacts to change their appearance, who were flashy, well-connected, and often too intoxicated to recall details. They didn't always rob. Sometimes they scoped places out for future jobs or sold information to others. It was a web of manipulation that had gone unnoticed until it turned deadly. Julian admitted the plan that night wasn't to kill anyone. The goal was to slip a sedative into Chris's drink, rob him while he was unconscious, and leave before dawn. But according to Julian, Celine had grown reckless. He claimed she had a violent streak, and when Chris began to resist, things spiraled. Ava might have panicked, but it was Celine who escalated the situation. The defensive wounds on Chris's arms suggested a struggle. The brutality of the attack, especially the multiple stab wounds, indicated rage, not panic. Investigators began to believe Celine hadn't just been part of the plan. She may have been the one who turned it into a murder. Now, finding her became urgent. Her photo, extracted from surveillance footage, was distributed to law enforcement across the country. But there were no hits, no matching fingerprints, no arrest records. She had vanished. Meanwhile, Ava was officially named a fugitive and charged in absentia. The case made headlines again, this time with clearer suspects and a chilling motive. The public was stunned by the cold precision behind the crime, the way the women had manipulated the system, and how easily they had slipped through the cracks. What started as a high society party had turned into the exposure of a predatory operation that had been hiding in plain sight. But until Celine was found, the full truth remained out of reach, and detectives feared that with her still free, the danger wasn't over. The turning point came quietly, not through high-tech surveillance or forensic breakthroughs, but from a sharp-eyed hotel maid in a budget motel just outside the city. She had seen a news segment about the murder of Chris Dickerson and the two women involved. One of the faces, Celine's composite sketch, looked eerily familiar. A guest checked into the motel 2 nights earlier using a fake ID but paid in cash and kept to herself. She had a snake tattoo on her arm and never allowed housekeeping inside her room. Something about her seemed off. The maid called the tip line. Within hours, detectives arrived at the motel with a warrant. They moved in quickly, and there, inside room 212, they found Ava Montgomery. She had changed her hair color, ditched her phone, and was living off prepaid debit cards. But the evidence was overwhelming. Inside her bag were several fake IDs, thousands of dollars in cash, Chris Dickerson's missing phone, and a small black notebook. It contained handwritten notes, names, addresses, dates, and even details about the types of alcohol certain men preferred. It wasn't just a notebook, it was a target list. Under questioning, Ava didn't deny being there the night Chris was killed. But she insisted she hadn't planned for things to go that far. She claimed the robbery was meant to be quick and clean, just like the others. According to her, Celine had changed the plan. When Chris woke up faster than expected and tried to resist, Celine snapped. Ava described watching in horror as the situation escalated, but she hadn't called for help. She hadn't stopped it. She had run. Her story, while self-serving, matched much of what Julian had already told investigators. And while Ava was now in custody, Selene was still missing. Authorities issued an international arrest warrant, suspecting she may have fled the country using one of several stolen identities. Border Patrol agents were alerted. Interpol got involved. But weeks passed, and no confirmed sightings were reported. It was as if she had disappeared completely. The case against Ava moved forward quickly. With Julian's testimony, the evidence from the motel, and her own admission of involvement, prosecutors had more than enough to charge her with second-degree murder, conspiracy to commit robbery, and multiple counts of fraud. She pleaded not guilty, but her trial was set. Though one suspect was finally behind bars, there was little sense of closure. The second woman, the one believed to have actually killed Chris Dickerson, remained a shadow. Somewhere out there, Selene Rhodes was free, and with her freedom came a lingering fear. Would she do it again? The trial of Ava Montgomery began 6 months after her arrest. The courtroom was packed on the first day, filled with journalists, curious citizens, and Chris Dickerson's grieving friends and family. The prosecution painted a picture of a calculated predator, a woman who used charm and deception to get close to her victims, then stood by as her partner turned a robbery into a brutal killing. They presented text messages between Ava and Julian Knox, surveillance footage, and excerpts from her handwritten notebook. The most powerful moment came when Julian testified, describing in chilling detail the phone call he received from Ava, the night of Chris's murder. His words were calm but damning. Ava's defense team attempted to separate her from the violence, arguing she was manipulated by Selene, caught up in something bigger than she could control. They described her as scared, overwhelmed, and ultimately a bystander to a crime she never intended to happen. But the jury wasn't swayed. Her presence at the scene, her failure to call for help, her continued involvement in other scams, they all painted a picture of someone deeply complicit. After a 2-week trial and just 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty on all major counts. Ava was sentenced to 32 years in prison, with no chance of parole for at least 20. The judge called her actions cold, calculated, and deeply disturbing, especially given the methodical nature of her crimes and the complete lack of remorse shown during trial. For Chris's family, it was some measure of justice, but it was far from peace. They still lived with the unanswered question of where Selene Rhodes had gone. Despite ongoing international efforts, Selene remained missing. Leads came and went, possible sightings in South America, false alarms in Europe, but nothing concrete. The trail was cold. Authorities believed she had access to enough stolen identities and money to live undetected for years. A woman who could blend in so seamlessly, who could vanish without leaving a trace, had proven difficult to pin down. Some believed she had started over, continuing her schemes under new names. Others thought she might have disappeared forever, buried under the weight of what she had done. Chris Dickerson's story became a grim cautionary tale about trust, appearances, and the dangers that can hide behind charm and confidence. His legacy lived on through a foundation set up in his name to support victims of fraud and violent crime. But in the city where it all happened, his murder left a scar. The lights of the rooftop parties still flickered each weekend, but they now carried a shadow, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who smile first.